Questions?
Yeah, so last week when we were talking about like this practice, this awareness practice that I am doing when I'm talking to people, you mentioned something about sinking back into the awareness when doing that, talking to people. And what I was doing was concentrating on the person I'm talking to and just feeling like fully engaged. So it feels like
Yeah,
you
that's
said.
preliminary. That's a good preliminary practice. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, so then I wanted to ask you, what did you mean by sinking back into the awareness and not like concentrating when talking to people?
You could do a backflip into infinity, and then you just rest in infinity. I mean, that's one way to do it. That's how the Toltec do it. Or you could just be in presence. Or you could just focus on the space between the thoughts. Or you could quiet the thoughts. Or easier for some people would be to just focus on the breath. And the other one is to realize that you're the totality of everything that there is, right? Including that person you're talking to, including to the sounds of the birds, the lights, the floors, the ceiling, everything everything that's there is one thing. And just drop yourself out of it. And just be with what is thusness. It takes practice. I mean, it takes a little practice, but most of it is just believing you can do it. And then once you can do it, remember the practice of turning the light around?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so when you turn the light around, you take your awareness, which is usually focused outward like this, and you turn the light around, you turn the light of awareness around, and now you're looking at the spaciousness of mind, right? Right behind all the sensory inputs. And then you get rid of the duality, and it's just there. So it's a process, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and then it becomes second nature. There's like 1,000 ways to get there because it's all there is. I mean, you can't really get away from it. But it's the mind that obscures it. But you can also treat the mind just like another bird song, or another, a tree blowing in the wind. It's just a noise that's in there like everything else. Or, in there. By in there, I mean the Dharmakaya, the spaciousness of mind. Does that help? Follow up? That's
That
a good.
helped.
That's a good
Yeah,
question. Follow up.
yeah, I have a
But the back
follow up.
somersault into
So when
infinity is the most fun. The back somersault into infinity, that's the most fun one, I think. Just go, boom, and then you land in infinity.
Mhm.
It's amazing that it's here. That it's just amazing that it exists. Right. That right there is the most miraculous thing. That consciousness exists. It's all that exists. But why should it exist? I guess is the most extraordinary thing. Okay, follow up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So when I am focusing on the totality or like space between thoughts, and when talking to people, what I notice or what I see is a response comes for talking, and
Mm-hmm.
I say that out. But it feels like that response is automatic. It's
It,
not
it is.
smart. It's not witty.
It is automatic.
But it feels like when I actually focus on what to say, then I say witty or smarter things than the otherwise.
Witty or smarter things when you focus on your thoughts, or you focus on the sky-like nature of mind, or the
So
emptiness of.
so yeah so yeah. So when I focus on the emptiness or the sky-like nature, then the response is easy and automatic. But
It
when
is.
I
It
focus
is
on the
easy.
conversation,
Exactly. Exactly. You don't have to think about. You don't have to think to. You don't have to think to speak. As a matter of fact, okay. So we've talked about performance athletes, right, at the peak of their game, like Michael Jordan on the basketball court, or a great downhill skier, right, or a great, competitive diver. When they're at their peak performance, they're not there, right? They're just not there. That's how they're able to do what they do. Their mind doesn't get in the way. So they're free from all the weirdness of mind. That's called not doing, by the way, just for the audience. That's not doing. Now, we have spent so many years, all of us, learning how to speak, learning how to respond, learning how to structure our sentences, learning grammar, learning all of this stuff. That's really quite automatic. And you don't even need to be. There's a great Sufi story about this where a king says, so there's a Sufi in front of some despotic king. And the king has called for this Sufi because he's known for being very wise and also a good military strategist or something like that. But the Sufi doesn't particularly want to come to the court. He's not interested in fame, and he's not interested in getting tangled up with the king, this particular king. And I don't know exactly what the king said to him, but the Sufi responded with something that was fairly disrespectful. And the king came back at him and said, "How dare you speak to me, the king? How dare you speak that way in my presence?" And the Sufi responded, "I'm not in your presence." And so you could be there bodily and not be there in any meaningful way, right? And so as long as you're identifying with the body and the brain and the words and all the stuff like that, it's a lot easier to get tangled up. It's much better, if you can, to get into the simplicity of the naturalness and just deal with the occasion as it arises. And so for that, you don't need to be present. It's the automatic stuff. It's like shooting the free throws. When you're really, really good at throwing, you have to have practice the free throws, right? So you have to already have the ability. But in terms of the execution of the ability, it's quite straightforward and easy. It's, if anything, if you try, you make it worse, right? And I think that's one of the things we respect about good comedians or good people with their comebacks or whatever. You can tell that they're not deliberated. They're just automatic, right? Does that help? I mean, you want to restate the question or follow up?
Yeah. So a follow up. Yeah. So let's take the example of a comedian. So they are able to do it because they have practiced it so much, right? So now they're able to do it.
Not just their practice, but their freedom from inhibition. Their lack of, okay, so we can actually put this in psychoanalytic terms, sort of ish. Freud and his daughter and Melanie Klein and all of the psychoanalysts really divided mental processes up into to two kinds. Primary process, which is the mind that an infant uses and that we use in dreams. In dreams, we don't think about, oh, well, I'm going to dream that I'm in a cotton field. Oh, I'm going to dream that there's an orchard. Oh, I'm going to dream that I'm going to get on an escalator and then get on an elevator. We don't, when you're in dreaming, it just happens, right? It just, I'm not talking about lucid dreaming. I'm just talking about normal dreaming. It just happens. That's called primary process. That's incredible stuff, by the way. Okay, then when we wake up and we go to work or we're talking to our parents or our friends or whatever, depending on how uptight we are, we go into secondary process. And in secondary process, we make sure that everything makes sense, that everything's linear, more or less, that everything's organized and it's got the right structure. And, it sounds good. And we worry about, well, am I doing this right? Do I have the right grammar? This, that, so on and so forth. And am I saying what I'm saying coherent? That's secondary process. So that's the waking mentality of most humans all the time. Now, the primary process, which is free-flowing, much more imaginative, much more creative, and that's what the painters, the poets, the comics, and anybody that uses their mind in that kind of creative, spontaneous way wants to use primary process because it's spontaneous, right? And so primary process is the process of the way. Okay? Secondary process needs things like grammar, it needs things like structure, it needs to like worry about what are people going to think, right? So the comic can work from primary process, like the one I like is the Marx Brothers jokes. Last night, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How it got in my pajamas, I'll never know, right? Last week, we went to, Alabama? To hunt for elephant. We went to Alabama because the Tuscaloosa, right? So that's primary process. You know, clang associations, free associations. And so when interpreting the unconscious, Freud would use that primary process. And in the old days of psychoanalysis, and even now, primary process is very, very useful, and you can read people's minds with it, right? Because of Freudian, what they call Freudian slips, although those can be neurological also. But you could tell by people's free associations, like someone might have a free association to the 5 stages of grief, right? Well, that reveals a preoccupation with death, for example. And there's many things like this. So in terms of getting the information about the operating system of your mind, you need to know the difference between primary and secondary process. Now let's go back to your question and see if I can answer it better.
Yeah, so exactly. So what it feels to me that when I talk with a secondary process, I feel it's more like understandable, it's more coherent, and it's more appropriate.
And it's less funny.
Than when I talk with a primary.
And it's less funny. Right? Yeah. So what we loved to see that in people, the spontaneous, quip or the spontaneous joke or whatever, or the smart-ass remark, because it shows the freedom of their mind, right? In that sense, right? But still, if we're using words and we're using concepts and we're using things like that, we're still constrained by language, right? And ultimately, you got to get free of language, because language is just limited. Words are limited and limiting, right? Follow up some more. I don't recall the question in the beginning. What was it? I want to make sure I've answered it.
Oh yeah. The question was that when I talk to people concentrating on the conversation, I feel it's more coherent and appropriate than when I just like let go and just flow, like just become too easy and automatic. Yeah.
That's good. So that's not doing. That's according with the way. That's getting closer to according with the way. That's naturalness and just being because your brain works fine. People just have to relax and not worry about a bunch of 10 different things before something comes out of their mouth. On the other hand, sometimes you don't want anything to come out of your mouth, and you want to be very, very careful what you say, right? I mean, if the police have pulled you over and they pulled you out of your car, you shouldn't be using free association. Like, what's the matter, Ossifer?
So it sounds like secondary process is useful at some times, but then primary process can also be used to communicate with the world as well.
With people, it's more the communication of trust, safety, love, and you got to be in a safe environment to do that, right? So secondary process is the language, the process of logic, and grammar, and syntax, and formality, and you're in court, right? Whereas primary process is just like I'm a wild and crazy guy. Remember Steve Martin? I'm a wild and crazy guy, So just that kind of, freedom. I don't know where he got the idea to put an arrow through his head, right? But that was probably the primary process.
Got it.
And so actually, this is where West and East meeting is very important for the world going forward. For one thing, machines aren't going to be able to do primary process, right? And so that's going to limit their ability to even understand. How's a machine going to understand? I heard this example from Scott Aronson recently, a really smart guy. I like that guy a lot. He teaches at the University of Texas. He said, well, how do we codify what makes the Beatles good? Not the first album, because that was rock and roll, and we got the first chords and all that. But the you know, the Sgt. Pepper's or the White Album, where they have, you know, A Day in the Life, and they have these Julia, these beautiful songs that had never been made before. I mean, so I think I tweeted something about that talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius sees a target no one else can see, right? And so the machines, there's no reason to think that the machines are going to be able to do any of this. And we're a long, long way from real AI, if you ask me. So machines won't be able to do, well, I guess, let me think. Can they do primary process?
I think machines can free associate with introduction of little randomness in the picture.
But can they free associate to the energy of the person they're speaking to? No, they can't sense the energy. Like imagine you're on an elevator, right? And it's very, very tense, you know? And you're going up to the 30th floor, and there's like 5 people on the elevator. And everybody's really uptight because something that's happened down there, or something in the news or whatever, and it's taking forever for the doors to close, and the elevator's going up very, very, very slowly, right? The human, the funny human could come up with a quip, right? And everybody burst out laughing because they could feel the energy of the elevator, right? I don't think a machine's going to be able to. A machine can't do that because you have to be conscious in order to feel that energy.
Yeah, being funny is not just randomness. It's smarter than that. So
much smarter than that. Much smarter than that. Yeah, much smarter than that. I don't know how we got back on the machines, but yeah. So that would be an interesting thing to look at. Is primary process in an AI, primary process in a large language model. Not really the definition of all these words keeps changing, right? Because we keep moving the bar. But in a large language model AI, what kind of primary process is possible? Right? It'd be interesting. A new Turing test, a psychoanalytic Turing test. Okay, another question, or you want to follow up on that?
Next question.
Question.
Yeah, this is from Tao Te Ching, chapter 36.
Okay.
So I just wanted to just ask your thoughts on it.
I happen to have that right. I happen to have that book right here, which I recommend to everybody. That's I'm speaking to an audience that's of above average intelligence, fairly verbal, right? Fairly, and that pretty much has a job and has a solid base to work from, because you got to take care of the basics first. You got to have a roof over your head and food on the table and so on and so forth. So I recommend it to everybody that's off the first or second level of Maslow's hierarchy. So which chapter is it?
36.
It's not because I'm trying to be snooty, although it could be interpreted that way, I'm sure. Okay. Oh, this is beautiful. May I read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Should you want to contain something, you must deliberately let it expand. Should you want to weaken something, you must deliberately let it go strong. Should you want to eliminate something, you must deliberately allow it to flourish. Should you want to take something away, you must deliberately grant it. This is called subtle elimination. Flexibility and yielding overcome adamant coerciveness. Fish shouldn't be taken from the depths, and effective tools of the nation shouldn't be shown to others. So let me just read the first part again. Should you want to contain something, you must deliberately let it expand. Should you want to weaken something, you must deliberately let it grow strong. Should you want to eliminate something, you should deliberately allow it to flourish. Should you want to take something away, you must deliberately grant it. Well, that's gorgeous. It's just like, whoa. Okay, and this is called subtle elimination. flexibility and yielding overcome adamant coerciveness. And then there's a thing about not showing your weapons or your instruments to other people, you know. Which, okay, I won't comment on the U.S., the state of the U.S. right now. So, okay, what questions about that beautiful passage?
Yeah. So should you want to contain something, you must deliberately let it expand.
Yes.
That I understand. I've seen that. Should you want to weaken something, you must deliberately let it grow strong. That also I have seen and experienced.
Okay.
The third one, should you want to eliminate something, you must deliberately allow it to flourish.
Okay.
That one I wanted to discuss. So I will take an example. So like my addiction for like fried food or like any like bad habit regarding food. Whenever I have let it flourish, let it expand, it has weakened because I automatically don't want to eat that thing anymore.
Yeah,
but
right.
after some time,
right.
it again comes back. So I'm not able to eliminate it.
I'm sorry, what?
So I'm not able to eliminate it even though I allowed it to flourish, because my desire weakens, it grows, like it becomes weaker, but it doesn't go away completely.
Well, you have to allow it to flourish. You haven't allowed it to flourish. You've let it expand. You've let it expand. So, but the point here is deliberately let it expand. You deliberately let it grow strong. Now you want to eliminate it, right? Eliminate something.
Yeah.
You must deliberately allow it to flourish. Well, how have you allowed it to flourish?
I mean, I allowed it to that level where I was getting physical symptoms of issues, and then I stopped. But then when I got better, the desire came back again.
Well, did you allow it to flourish? I mean, if you want your body to give up on fried or fatty foods, fried food, is it?
Fried food.
Permanently. All right, you're talking about getting rid of it permanently?
Yeah.
Well, then you would really have to allow it to flourish. I don't think you're willing to do that.
That will lead me to death, probably, if I would let it do
Probably
that.
not death, but maybe something close to it. You wouldn't want to ever see fried food again.
Yeah.
To let it flourish, I mean,
like,
okay, imagine letting fried food flourish. So you just took the baby steps, and that's fine. But if you really want to eliminate it, it's going to take you're going to have to deliberately allow it to flourish.
So then I'm afraid of getting close to death, I guess.
No, you wouldn't get close to death, I don't think. You're a young man, you're healthy. You just get really, really, really fat, and the only thing you'd be eating is fried foods, and your house would be full of fried foods. And when you went to somebody's house, you would bring fried food with you. And when you went on a trip, you would only have fried food. You know, allow it to flourish. Deliberately allow it to flourish. And do that for 6 months.
So getting fat is not the issue. It's the acid reflux that I get. Like
okay, well, let's not get too personal. Let's not get too personal, because I don't give medical advice on this is an educational thing. But yeah, food is going to be the most difficult thing. One of the most difficult things, because that's but you see how it works, right? But because there's a bodily need for it. This is talking about political issues or a troublesome neighbor or a pest in the yard. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. You never hear it. I used it for treating eating disorders with much success, much more successful than anything else. And so if you want to do that, you got to do it. But you're talking to some pretty extreme stuff.
Yeah.
Are you sure you want to do it?
Stuff. No, then I think it's better to just weaken it to a good extent and not eliminate it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, use common sense, of course. Yeah. Yeah, but see how counterintuitive it is, right? That you allow something to expand in order to make it shrink. It's amazing. Follow up on that?
Yeah, I have one other question about the lion.
Okay.
Fish shouldn't be taken from the depths. What does, like, why should we fish from the depths?
Well, let's look at the lines above it. This is called subtle illumination. Should you want to take something away, you must deliberately grant it. This is called subtle illumination. Flexibility and yielding overcome adamant coerciveness. Fish shouldn't be taken from the depths. Well, why wouldn't you take fish from the depths? Just speaking literally.
Like, if they're available on the surface, then why should I take it from the depths?
That's one way of looking at it. How else could you look at it?
Fish shouldn't be taken from the depths. Like, if I need to take fish from the depths, that too much effort, and there are other ways to not need that.
Or it could be that at the depths, fish, that's where they reproduce. And if you take it from the depth, there won't be any more, they won't reproduce, and now you're not going to have any fish, right? I mean, if they spawn on the bottom, for example. But what if it's not about fish at all? What if it's just about something that's alive and living and creative, and that's inside and in depth, right? You don't take it, you can kill it. I mean, what if it's to use the metaphor, and it's just a metaphor, it's just something to stimulate the thinking. If the fish is alive and creative and reproducing and doing whatever fish do down in the mysterious depths, like the unconscious, for example. I mean, Jung would go nuts over this, and so would Freud, frankly. You know, Carl Jung, Jung.
Yeah.
You know, there's some things you just leave down there in the unconscious. You don't pull them up, and you don't grab everything out from the unconscious and pull it up, right? Like, you may have an unconscious wish to murder your father, right? That's not something you necessarily want to pull out of the depths and put on the surface, right? Unless you're, I don't know, one of those Shakespearean kids that killed their dads, or who else was it? Oedipus the king, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus the king, or you know, there's some impulses or some symbology or whatever that you just leave in the depths. That's another way to look at it.
Got it.
All right.
All right.
The effective tools of the nation shouldn't be shown to others. Well, if okay, to have an effective tool is a very valuable thing. We're scarce on them right now. But let's just use a military example, because that's the easiest one, right? When your nation goes around bragging about all its military, you know, might, all of its latest, greatest, you know, fighter jets and killer robots and nuclear arms or whatever, you're for the gratification of your own narcissistic ego, you're making yourself less effective, right? And so in the Tao Te Ching, they both give, it's very fascinating because this is during the era of the warring states in China. So it's a lot like kind of what the US is going through now, or what China went through for centuries and centuries and centuries. That's where some of this wisdom comes from, right? And so they include both advice for individuals and advice for nations. And individuals and nations are very similar because they're born, they grow, they mature, and then they die, right? And they also get into fights with one another, right? And so you wouldn't want to show them your most effective tools or weapons for the simple reason that they're going to use them against you, or they're no longer treasured or valued, or there's a lot of reasons why a leader would, or a military leader, or a political leader, or an individual would think twice before showing people the effective tools of the nation. Like, you know, even I only share things now because I'm an old man. But some of these things that I'm sharing are deep trade secrets and the psychoanalytic tools, and not only that, tantric methodologies that were completely secret for centuries and centuries and centuries. The Yogacara, the Tantra of the Buddhists, for example, until the Chinese invaded, and this is another lesson, when the Chinese invaded Tibet, then they had to get their teachings out, and so what was once secret now becomes available in everywhere in the world, pretty much, right? as the world. Okay, so and there were also insular. Up until the middle of the 20th century, Sufism was restricted only to Muslims, right? And only in a particular part of the world. Well, that's not entirely true, because there was Hindu Sufis and there was Zoroastrian and Christian Sufis, but that was the exception, right? The exception that kind of proved the rule. But now that the world is all connected in the cloud, on the internet, social media, Twitter, X, etc., it doesn't make sense to sequester that information the way it was before. And so you have to adapt to the times, right? And the time frame of these texts is more than 2,000 years, well over 2,000 years. And so they've learned things through that period of time. And that's why a thinking man, a sensitive man, and when I say man, of course, I mean woman, and I mean anybody of any ilk, whatever. I'm not trying to be exclusive here. It's hard to do the whole thing, the whole spectrum. Thoughtful people should be interested in something like this because it helps with life. And in terms of an abbreviated, condensed guide to life, 80 chapters, what is it? 80 chapters in 60 pages. So it's 60 pages of guidance. And it has some remarkable truths in it and remarkable insights that are not at all obvious, especially not in the modern industrialized West. And so, that's why I bring this up. And the other thing is, you got to have a highly, 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 highly realized translator. An illuminate, basically. And so that was what we had in Thomas Clary. So this is very, very precious, this book, this translation. And of course, it's the least popular one on Amazon, I think, just about, because other people do poetic interpretations like Stephen Mitchell. And they just say, well, I don't speak the language and I don't know the Chinese and I don't really know the culture, but I'm a poet. And, maybe people will be interested in my poetry that's based on this. Well, people went nuts because it was so beautiful, just like with Rumi. And they took the poetic interpretation, free interpretation by a 20th century American as the real thing, because we weren't sophisticated enough. We didn't know any better. And we miss a lot, and then we misunderstand a lot, and a lot of it's cleaned up and twisted. So the American, modern American mind can accept it, but then you lose the juice, you lose the truth, the power, the depth of understanding. And so that's my argument why people should consider this book, The Essential Tao, Thomas Clary, just the first 60 pages. So thank you for bringing it up. Follow up. Sorry for the plug, but I'm a dying man.
I have another question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so this one is from one of your tweets from, I think, Teilhard de Chardin.
Teilhard de Chardin in French. Teilhard de Chardin was a early 20th century, I believe, early 20th century French Catholic who I think got excommunicated later, but he was go ahead. Chardin is Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, the tweet was, the most satisfying thing in life is to have been able to give a large part of oneself to others. So I asked you on the tweet as well. You said it's for contemplation. Yeah. So I thought about it, and for me, I got some understanding, but that seems more superficial. So I wanted to ask your thoughts on that. What do you think your thoughts on this tweet? Well, I can tell you what I thought, and then you can.
Well, why don't you tell us what you thought?
Yeah. So for me,
it's more interesting than what I think, because my thoughts are the problem with somebody in my position sharing thoughts is that people then take them for their own thoughts, right? And that's counterproductive in this enterprise. This is a different enterprise, and that's hard for some people to recognize, is that this is really a learning enterprise. This is a coaching enterprise to get people awake, not to just give them something, the easiest, most acceptable thing to them, you know, because they can get that anywhere. They can get that from Eckhart Tolle, they can get that from Rupert Spira, and those guys are great for that, you know. But then, see, in this enterprise, it's not just insight we want. It's not just insight. We also need some wisdom, and these books contain wisdom in them, right? And it's also about life. It's not just about waking up. So you have to wake up, and you have to kind of grow up, right? You have to be able to manage life and help people around you and help yourself and things like that. So it's a foundationally different enterprise than just waking up. It's waking up in the context of a fully developed human life. All right? So that's aspirational, but I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so what I thought it meant was to give a large part of oneself. To me, it meant whatever is important to me, whatever I think is mine, if I can give a large part of that to others, then I would be relieved of the burden of whatever comes with possessions, and that will be satisfying thing in life. That is like one interpretation I got out of that. But then the other thing is the self here probably means commanding self, and to give a large part of that kind of self to others, that I wasn't able to get anywhere with that.
Okay. So what's the question?
Yeah, so I got I feel like I got the superficial understanding, which is to give whatever is important to me, to not own that and let it be give to others, so that myself gets down, or like it's reduced. But there are also it seems a deeper meanings to that, which are related to the actual like other than just possessions. So what are your interpretation, or what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So let's get the quote. The most satisfying part of life is to have given a substantial portion of yourself to others. Is that how it goes? Something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, this is a quote from somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So, and what he thought, we're not looking into. We're not even looking at the context of this thought. So that's what I mean by contemplation. So what it means to me is of no particular importance. But what I do want to point out is this is one quote, and we've taken it out of context. We don't even know if it's true, right? We can't assume that because something's written down, it's got somebody's name underneath it, that it's true. So people have to contemplate it and say, is this true? And so you've correctly pointed out, so possessions, I don't think it has anything to do with possessions, personally. And the self to Chardin was probably the ego. I mean, I don't know. So you were right. He's probably, which is kind of like the commanding, so what the Sufis call the commanding self. Oh, I wish I had that book right here. And they have a dog with a chain on it, right? That's us. It's a dog, right? So the commanding self is not something that, I mean, why would you want to give that to somebody else? You don't even want it yourself. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right. So then the whole thing about giving self to others, well, you know, at another level of understanding, there is no separation between self and others, right? So how can you give self to others? So that right there shows that his level of realization, I mean, he may be a highly respected mystic. Is he a mystic? I don't know. He's more of a theoretician. And he may have been excommunicated or whatever, but I don't think he was a fully illuminated or enlightened man. Or this quote is just taken from some book he wrote when he was, you know, in his 20s or 30s. So we don't know any of that, right? But why would you give self to other when, as Jesus taught and the Hindus teach and the Muslims teach, that self and others, or the Sufis teach that self, and the Buddhists certainly, there is no distinction between self and other. We're all bozos on this bus, and we're all the same bozo, and it's all the same bus. So the thing doesn't even make any sense. And part of the reason for this tweet, I mean, between you and me, was to check how people respond to goody-goody words. They just assume that if, you know, oh, the most... So let's look at what are the goody-goody words in this statement? Satisfying, right? Okay, yeah. Read the quote. Read the quote.
The most satisfying thing in life.
Okay, most satisfying thing in life. Whoa, that's... Whoa, the most satisfying thing in life. All right, go ahead.
Is to have been able to give a large part of oneself to others.
Okay, that sounds great. Why not give the whole self to others, like Jesus did? I mean, who knows when he wrote it? Who knows what the context? So this is just a place to start thinking, right? How much is it responding to the preface, the most satisfying thing in life? And then how much automatic thinking goes into, well, if he says it like that, right? He must be, you know, he must be enlightened, and he must know what he's talking about. And then we get to the part of to give a substantial part of the self to others. What does that even mean? Basically, it means generosity. And to that extent, people respond because generosity is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. Generosity is one of the paramitas. And so if you give of yourself to others, that's true generosity. That's the first Buddhist paramita, right? You have to have that, and it's the last one too, because in the end you realize there's no distinction between yourself and others. So that's kind of what I think about it, you know. But see, these things are for contemplation, not for dissection, right? Except to dissect your own mind and see, well, how much do I respond to reflexively, right? Some people, all you have to do is say Buddha, and they go, ooh, you know. So that's why the Zen people say, if you see a Buddha on the side of the road, kill him. Because what you're doing is you're doing automatic thinking, right? And you can't learn by doing automatic thinking. You have to examine your own heart, your own mind, your own spirit, right? And that's where the work is. And so this is where the Sufis are really good. The Sufis are good, and the Buddhists are great on this. And frankly, something that I haven't mentioned that I really should is for a person who's really serious, about science. I just finished a 30-hour series, and it was worth watching. Although it was, you know, it has everything in it, so parts of it don't appeal to me, and other parts do appeal to me. And it's good science fiction. It's the three-body problem. But it's the Chinese version, so it's in Chinese and Mandarin. So you got to use the captions, which takes some attention. But I recommend it to thinking young men and women and everybody else. But at the very end, they get into the hardcore science, because now they're thinking about the other dimensions, and they're thinking about, you know, the relative size of things. And there's this civilization, the Trisolarans. And they just have another way of thinking about things because their science is much more evolved, right? And it sounds like he just read the flower ornament scripture. It sounds like he just studied 2nd century. It was translated to Chinese in the 7th century, but like he'd been studying that. And so for serious thinkers, and I don't know of any way to do this because the Sufis can't do this part. This part only the Buddhists can do. The interdependent origination and penetration of time, space, and the relativity of size, and the just the gorgeousness of the whole way that thing's constructed. You need the Buddhists for that. And so the Avatamsaka Sutra, the golden, I'll put a link in the bottom. It's called the Flower Garland Sutra, or the Flower Ornament Sutra. Translated put together in the 2nd century, translated in the 7th century into Chinese, and then translated into English in the 20th century, again by our illuminate, you know, one of the most highly realized man I've ever encountered in my life, right? Up there with like the Dalai Lama and people like that, is doing the translating. So we're very, very, very fortunate. That book's necessary for people who are really interested in science, or are interested in philosophy, and interested in really understand and really working with their mind. But that typically is an older person maybe in their mid-30s, 40s, who's really serious. All right? About about everything important. All right, then I lost the question. What was the question about it?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask about the large part of oneself to others, and then we talk.
Yeah, what is even a large part of oneself? What does that even mean? The self doesn't have parts. Right? So he probably wrote that as a young man, or he, who knows how he wrote it. Maybe he was talking to the Pope, and the Pope was going to excommunicate him. We don't know where that comes from. But it's illustrative of how number one must not automatically assume that everything you read is true. But because it could be true at one level, but it's not true at another level at all, right? And so this is exercises to develop a person, not to indoctrinate them. So this enterprise is not about indoctrinating anybody in anything. It's trying to cultivate the capacities of people, their capacities for love, their capacities for understanding, their capacities for, awakening, their capacities for what they do after they awaken, right? Because there can be a lot of fallout after that too, right? So, okay. Another question?
Yeah.
Question.
So this one is again one of your tweets. It said the world has no being but an allegory. From end to end, its state is but a fark and play. So
the world has no being but an allegory. From end to end, it's a farce and a play.
From end to end, its state is but a fark and play.
A farce, F-A-R-C-E?
F-A-R-C-E,
a farce and a play. Yeah. Is that Shakespeare?
That I don't know. I read it somewhere in your tweets, but I was not able to find it when I was trying to find out.
I don't remember saying that, but I like it. What being is but an allegory, nothing but a farce and a play. A play of consciousness, it's a play of consciousness. It's and being is There's a more recent thing I tweeted out. No, I didn't tweet it. Damn it! It was Don Juan saying, "What you call the world is merely a description," and that's true. You look at Donald Hoffman, right? If you don't understand it, you could look at Donald Hoffman. Not that he discovered it. This is ancient understanding. But you know who Donald Hoffman is?
Yeah.
And so he says that basically the world is kind of like a computer touchscreen or something like that, or not touchscreen, where basically everything is just kind of like an icon, and that we don't see we can't see reality with our senses, right? This is what neurobiology shows us. This is what physics shows us. This is what logic shows us. This is just the way things are, right? So what we see is just a description of the world, like Don Juan Mateus, the teacher of Castañeda, and the student of Hanaro, right? Taught that when he said your world is just a mere description, right? So in another language, this is an allegory for the truth behind the apparent, right? And I said it was a farce. Did I say that? A farce and a play?
Yeah.
Well, I wish you would find that, because I don't think I would call it a farce, but I might have. I could have been upset about something in politics or something. I mean, I might have called it a farce. Humans can sometimes be farcical, right? Including myself. Okay. But see, if you could find that, I'd really appreciate it, because first of all, I don't know who wrote it, and if it was me, I'd like to. Again, that just shows how you have to think about these things. You can't just assume anything, right? What is it? What does dr.a say in the Four Agreements? Which, by the way, now this book is this book is for everybody. The Four Agreements. Everybody, no matter what your level. The Four Agreements, dr.a. Have you read that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very nice book by by a guy who's instructed by his grandma, I think, in Nagualismo. To some extent, Nagualismo. That's a big world, Nagualismo. Okay, final question before we stop.
I have one more question, but I don't know if
Question.
I think it would be.
Question.
Yeah, I have one more question. Yeah,
Okay.
I have one more question, but
Okay.
I don't know if we have enough time. It's chapter 22 from Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
So what I don't understand is what is meant by tact or being tactful.
Oh, that's huge. That's huge. But a lot of it, you could start with what the dictionary says tactful means. Right?
Yeah.
What is tact?
Yeah.
Why don't you look it up real quick. Be tactful and you remain whole.
Yeah, so on Oxford it says consideration of politeness in dealing with others, diplomacy or skill in handling delicate negotiations.
Boom. Be tactful and you don't get your head chopped off as often. Be tactful in diplomatic issues and your country doesn't get invaded as frequently. Remember, this is the era of the warring states. Be tactful and you get along better with others. Right? Be tactful and you get in less fights, wars, and unnecessary conflict. So sometimes the Tao Te Ching it's very, very simplistic in many ways. It's just not we're just not used to thinking in this manner. So be tactful and you remain whole. Which chapter is that?
22.
I just want to get the second line. Okay. Be tactful and you remain whole. Bend and you remain straight. So let's just take that. So let's take the image of a palm tree, right? A palm tree in a hurricane, I grew up with palm trees, so it bends, right? And then it remains straight. Be tactful and you remain whole. Be flexible and then you remain straight. Then you can straighten back up, right? So if you're flexible, and also it has to do with upright, right? Be upright and flexible, and you're just better in the world, right? So if people can interiorize these and not get all rigid, like in the ghetto, it's like, you can't diss me, man. I mean, you can't diss me because I've got this respect and I'm rigid, right? You just can't say anything like that, or I'll cap your whatever. Never mind. Anyway, never mind. If you were tactful, you might not get yourself in that situation. And if you were flexible instead of rigid, you can't disrespect me, then you're more flexible, then you can go with it, right? And remain whole and you don't end up with a bullet in your butt. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So let me see if I can get this. It's keep the faith always. Keep the north also. Keep your head about you and your feet on the ground. And guard your mind, because now you got to be on defense if you're in social media much, and you need to. Most people, I mean, if you're in this enterprise, you kind of need to be there at least some of the time because a lot is happening in the world, and you have to be. I mean, to retreat from the world. Now I'm speaking to you specifically. Is not a good strategy. Because there's too much happening with AI, there's too much happening internationally, there's too much happening in industries that you're involved in that are going to be moving around very quickly. So you got to be right on top of everything. There's incredible things happening in AI and in the international warfare that we call, trade and finance and computation, etc. Okay, sir?
Yep.
All right, take good care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.